to the What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm Dr. Achina Stein. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Betsy Greenleaf. She's a trailblazer as the first female in the U.S. to become board certified in Urogynecology. She has been a premier women's health expert, a best-selling author, entrepreneur, inventor, and business leader specializing in female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery for over 20 years. She's a distinguished fellow of the American College of Osteopathic Obstetrics and Gynecology for her service and dedication in the field. Woohoo! We're both DOs and we're both distinguished fellows in our fields. She was recently awarded the Future of Healthcare Impact Award at the prestigious Mindshare Summit 2021 for her TED-like talk on the brain-gut-vagina connection. She is the owner of Greenleaf Health and Wellness, CEO of the Pelvic Floor Store, an online store dedicated to finding reliable pelvic health products. Those are really hard to find. She manages a blog at drbetsygreenleaf.com. And she's the host of Some of Your Parts podcast, dedicated to women's wellness and the notion that you are greater than the sum of your parts. And a Mind, Body, Spirit podcast that focuses on the trinity of total health. She's the best-selling co-author of You Were Made to Be Unstoppable. She is unstoppable. And she will be the host of the Happy Vagina Summit, a pelvic health summit that is going to be coming up really soon, and is currently writing a book on pelvic health called The Happy Vagina Diet. So welcome, Dr. Greenleaf. And I also want to ask people, if you're really satisfied and happy with this episode, to please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Welcome, Dr. Betsy Greenleaf.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tina. You know what, when you say all those things, I was like, oh, wow. Because I always feel like I haven't accomplished much. And then when you say it out loud, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. No wonder I don't have any time to do anything.
I know. You can stop accomplishing now.
Great. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I know. You've had a multitude of accomplishments, and it's really great. And people need you, and it's great that you have this expertise. And I'm really happy to have you here to talk about how mood is connected to pelvic health. You know, we were talking a little bit about how a lot of people don't really realize how the mood is connected to the gut. And you're going to tell us more about how the pelvic health is connected to the gut and how they're all connected together, you know, and that's like the foundations of functional medicine. But sometimes it's hard for people to connect the dots, right?
Yeah. You know, first of all, in general, pelvic health, let's just start there. I was talking to you a little bit about before that. I was shocked that when I recently saw a study that said 65% of women are uncomfortable saying the word vagina. And so we know that up to 50 to 80% of women will have a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. Yet many of them are suffering in silence because we can't use the words to talk about it. And if we can't talk about it, we can't ask for help, and then we can't heal. So it's really this silent epidemic, and it's really, really, it's scary. And I see this every day. I just had a woman come in the other day, and we were doing this vaginal lasering, and she feels so much better. And she's like, oh, I want to scream from the top of the rooftops. She's like, how much better I feel and how empowered I am. She's like, but I can't tell anybody because I'm embarrassed. So that's one of my biggest goals, is like, just get people talking, you know. And at first, if you can't say the word, say it in private, say it in front of a mirror. Just get used to saying the word, because then you become desensitized.
Right.
Because believe me, you know, people always ask me like, well, why did you become a gynecologist? That was not my dream job. It wasn't like a little girl, like, I'm going to look at vaginas all day long. Like, it just, in medical school, we become desensitized to what we're seeing in it. And it's just another body part. And we're just like, whatever.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And then, you know, I was thinking, like, you're talking about how everything's connected. I think that's one of the curse and blessings of being a DO, is we're taught fundamentally that everything is connected.
Right.
So sometimes it's really, I mean, I think it's great for us and for patients, but sometimes it, like, is very complicated to explain the interconnection between everything.
Right, right.
So,
I know most people, or most women, I should say, talk about it, something being a problem down there, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? We have made some headway in this area with the production of the vagina monologues, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that's still even around. You know, I think it was pre-COVID, but I don't know if it's back on Broadway. I think it was on Broadway and local areas. But I have seen that, and that was a wonderful impact in terms of getting people to be able to speak more freely about that part.
Right? And you know what the thing is, that a lot of times it kind of gets blown off like, oh, it's a woman's problem, like, you know, no big deal, or that's just a normal part of being a woman, when pelvic health actually impacts so much more. I mean, when it comes talking about the individual, it impacts confidence, it impacts mood, but then it impacts relationships. So that can impact, you know, if you have a significant other and you're somebody suffering from a pelvic health condition, that's going to strain that relationship. That can, if you have children and you're suffering from pelvic health issues, that's going to, you can't fully be there for your kids. That's going to impact that relationship. And in fact, they've actually have shown that this can affect work performance. And that's definitely something that's not talked about in the, you know, in the corporate world. But there are a lot of days lost because of women suffering from pelvic health issues and it affecting work performance. So it really really goes into all aspects of life too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Discomfort, pain, but also the fear of certain cycles happening and not being prepared for it, not knowing when, right? And if it does include having a, you know, a menses, how heavy it's going to be. Do I have enough pads? Do I need to pack some clothes, right? Extra clothes just in case, right? So there's all of these issues that do impact having problems in the pelvic area. So let's dive down deeper, more specifically about certain pelvic health conditions. What comes to mind that I see over and over again is, and it's in the pelvis, but it's more bladder related, but I'm sure it's connected to, gynecological issues, is interstitial cystitis, but also endometriosis and anything else that you feel that comes up over and over again that's connected to the gut or caused by the gut and connected to mood that is related. Yeah. Why don't you just start? Where do you think we should start? Because I know you have a ton of information. What you think will impact the most for my audience?
Yeah, sometimes people get confused over the word pelvis or pelvic too, because when we talk about the pelvis, it's basically the general area of the body from like the belly button down to the top of the thigh. So it's that whole area of the body, which incorporates the bladder, the vagina, the uterus, the ovaries, the rectum, like, you know, even for men, like the testicles and the penis, like everything from between those areas. So that's the pelvis. And that's like more of like a general terminology, which is great because of, you know, that's a little bit easier to say than the specific body parts. And so then we get into, let's talk about pelvic pain conditions, and they can fall into a wide variety of conditions. Interstitial cystitis, or IC for short, is an inflammatory condition of the bladder. And even though this was discovered in the late 1800s as a medical condition, they still don't know today what causes it. But you ask me, it has to do with a combination of inflammatory foods and gut health. We know with endometriosis, it's where the lining of the uterus, instead of getting sloughed off every month out of the uterus through the vagina, somehow gets back out into the abdomen and starts growing on the abdomen. And we've seen a drastic increase in that, in conditions like that, because of what's called endocrine disruptors. So these are chemicals in our environment, whether it's toxins from insecticides, pesticides, things in our detergents and cleaning agents that the body perceives as an estrogen. It like binds to our estrogen receptors and tricks the body so that we actually have more of these estrogen hormone related conditions.
Right. It's
And
in plastics too. And
yeah,
receipts.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. So then in general, like pelvic pain, like sometimes we just don't even know where it is that women are feeling pain in the vagina or on the outside, the vulva, which is the proper terminology. Sometimes we use the word vagina for everything down there, which
Right.
I'm fine with that. There are the vulva police out there that get a little crazy and they're like, okay, the vagina is just the tube from the outside to the uterus. But I'm just happy if you were use the word vagina to refer to anything down there. Like we'll work our way into the other proper terminology,
Right.
as we can get people to say just, that word. But sometimes pelvic pain isn't even a problem in the pelvis, which that gets crazy. Sometimes we know that the body, when you're mentally under stress or you're depressed or you're anxious, that maybe you don't have the ability to express those issues. And so sometimes these strong emotions or even traumas can come out as symptoms. And so for a lot of women or women who are having pelvic pain issues, it could be that their pelvic symptoms are just an expression of a larger problem going on, such as an emotional or trauma-based issue. So, and then we get the chicken. Here's when now we get with the chicken and the egg, because, all right, we're like, which happened first, the mental health issues, or if the gut is off? We know that 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy hormone that prevents depression and anxiety, is made in the gut.
Right.
Okay. So if the gut is off, now,
and that's in the pelvis, right?
And like if the gut is off, now we're going to have inflammation in the rest of the body. We also, like 85% of the immune system is made in the gut. And so if that's off, now we're maybe more prone to infections, specifically vaginal infections, urinary tract infections.
Right.
So if the gut is off, now we have this inflammatory issues that could happen. We have these infectious issues that can happen. We have it centering in some people in the pelvis. And now their nerve endings perceive pain. And then what ends up happening, this gets so crazy. Then what ends up happening with the pain receptors is when pain becomes chronic. So typically it takes about 3 months for a pain to become chronic. Those receptors in the pelvis become upregulated. So more and more signals are getting sent through them. And because the nervous system is being overloaded, your body actually makes more receptors. So you get more receptors in the pelvis, more receptors in the spinal cord, more receptors in the brain.
Right.
And so now we've upregulated your whole pain system. And now here's where it gets all crazy. They found that people who have chronic pain actually will develop physical changes in their brain that now make them more likely to have anxiety and depression. So it's like, okay, well, what happened first? Did the gut happen first? And that all ended up causing the anxiety and depression, or the anxiety and depression, which ends up raising cortisol, which could throw off your gut, now causing gut inflammation. So
well, the answer is it's both, really. It's a vicious cycle, and it does start in one place for some people and it starts in another place for other people. You could start at any point in that Ferris wheel of causes, right? At any point.
And this is why I get a little crazy. I was talking earlier with somebody about, like, once you start learning and discovering more about integrative and functional medicine, it's so hard to go back to traditional medicine and like ignore. It's like a Pandora's box. It's like you can never look at things the same again. And so what ends up happening is so many times, and I don't blame the traditional doctors, because this is how we're trained, is like, okay, if there's a problem and you've tried all the conservative things that they know of and nothing works, the next thing is, we'll cut those parts out. Well, let's just get rid of those parts. Well, I'll tell you, like, I can't tell you how many women I've seen that have had hysterectomies, had their ovaries out, had chunks of their vagina cut out for what's called vulvodynia, and still have the pain. Because I always explain it to my patients, like, let's say you had a problem with your foot. So it's easier a little bit to describe it with the foot. And you have chronic pain. And now you have upregulated receptors in your leg, in your spinal cord, in your brain. I go chop your foot off because that's where you're feeling your pain. You still have those receptors in your leg. You still have the receptors in the spinal cord. You still have the receptors in your brain.
Right.
So you still have foot pain, even though you don't have a foot.
Right.
You know, we hear about it all the time with people having phantom limb pain. That's why.
Mhm.
There have been, I can't even tell you how many studies, and this gets me so excited, especially when they started looking at functional MRIs, where they can actually map the brain out. And they looked at people who had chronic pain and what their brain structure looked
Right.
like, and all they did was put them through 8-week courses of either their meditation, 8 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy. And they've done this time and time again, 8 weeks of yoga, 8 weeks of creative visualization, and looked at their brain again after just doing those things, not doing medicines, not doing anything else. Their brain structure improved and their perception of pain improved because we were able to down regulate those receptors, and their mood improved.
Wow.
So, you know, that stuff I just got chills. Like, that stuff just
I know, you just gave me chills. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Because it is very, I feel like it is very narrow-minded to look at where the pain is being expressed, as that's the place that needs to be cut out. You know, just because it happens to be expressed there, and it could be really caused by other things that can be rectified, and then it's no longer being expressed, you know. So and so hopefully with time, you know, more and more people, particularly medical professionals, will embrace the functional medicine approach, and it's happening as we speak.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's tough too, because like you're talking about how the pain is expressed, and like I've been focusing on the gut and in general body inflammation, but I also see a lot of orthopedic problems coming from the back or coming from the hips, where the pain isn't in the back or the hips, but where the nerve endings are sensing the pain is in the pelvis. And that's very tough because, and once again, I'm not bad mouthing my orthopedic friends, but it's very hard for an orthopedic doctor to be like, I'm sending them back and being like, hey, look at that person's back, look at their hips. The vagina is not the problem, but once they hear the word vagina, they're like, not me, go to a gynecologist.
Exactly.
It's not always the vagina. You need to look outside of the vagina to find these sources.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. And, you know, I think this is a good place to even talk, you know, knowing this from our osteopathic roots, that you can have sensations in the bladder and the vagina and other sex organs just from your pelvis being subluxated, right?
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many people have that issue, and they've seen numerous doctors. And what subluxation is, everybody, is that if this was your pelvic bone here and this is your sacrum, what happens is that your pelvis just goes and it really just needs to be like this. And if you understand that there's all these nerves and ligaments and tendons connected, and you have your sacrum here, there's all of these nerves going into that just that little tweak actually throws everything off, and it can cause quite a bit of discomfort and pain. And it happens a lot in women who have had babies. Yeah. I was one of them. Yeah. So if you have urinary incontinence, you know, soon after having a baby, sometimes it's just because your pelvis is off. And why wouldn't it be off, right? All your ligaments are loose and you just delivered a baby. So it may not just snap back into place like it should. It's going to take some time, but it might actually snap back a little bit. And sometimes just bending over or mopping, raking, sweeping can actually put your pelvis right out. And it's so many doctors are not aware of this. But if you go to a DO, they'll know.
You know, I've also seen sometimes, like, connecting this back to like emotional health, is when you're stressed, a good number of women hold their stress in their pelvis and don't even realize it, that there's this kind of protective mechanism where we tend to tighten our muscles in our pelvis, just kind of like splint and protect ourselves from whatever. Right. And so when those muscles tighten up, sometimes that can be a source of, well, if the muscles are tight and their muscles are attached to bones, now the bones get pulled out of place. So, and then that becomes a chicken and the egg, because now when we have more pain, our muscles will tighten to splint against the pain and pathologically cause more pain. And then you get stuck in this vicious cycle with that. So,
right. Yeah. So, and that you just reminded me is that another source of pain is when you hold your muscles in and that tightness to protect the pelvic cage, so to speak, you can get really constipated. So just, serious constipation. Again, you're right that most people don't know that they're actually holding back or holding in and not loosening those abdominal muscles in order for you to even be able to have a bowel movement, which then is another source of pain and inflammation, right?
And now then we can blow your mind with constipation. So is the constipation because of that? Is it because the bacteria in the gut has been thrown off and now it affects gut motility? Or the other thing what can happen with constipation that it kind of feeds back into things is that when we're constipated, we tend to absorb more estrogen back out of the stool. And now we have high estrogen conditions such as endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, like estrogen dominance. So it's like
fibroids.
Fibroids. Yeah, crazy. So like diet plays a big role in this. Gut health plays a big role in this. It's just amazing. Like you can just get into these circular things, but I think when it comes down to it is just like trying to live your healthiest lifestyle to balance these things out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned diet. Tell us more about what diet is the healthiest diet. I know you're writing a book about it, and give us a sneak peek into what you're writing about that's important for vaginal health.
There's so many diets out there, and there's so many like anti-inflammatory diets, and there's the interstitial cystitis diet and the FODMAP diet, and these are all like anti-inflammatory diets. So right now what's really confusing is I have this giant spreadsheet where I'm trying to compare all the diets and see if there's an underlying kind of connection. But what I really think it comes down to is a simple rule is eat things that would naturally occur in the environment. So I always tell patients, Twinkies don't grow on trees, stay away from processed foods. And if you had to give up or cut back on like the biggest problems would be sugar, dairy, gluten, and processed foods. So gluten in wheat. Those are probably the biggest ones. And then adding more fermented foods into our diet because, let's face it, cavemen didn't have refrigeration. So a lot of our foods probably naturally had some bacteria on it. So our guts were more exposed to bacteria. Easy way to do that is through fermented foods. That's probably general rules. There are some, conditions that people can't, like histamine intolerance is a condition where people are missing an enzyme in their gut that they don't break down the histamine in foods, and that can really cause a lot of inflammation.
Thiamine oxidase.
They don't tend to tolerate fermented foods that much. What I love for patients to do, if they can afford it, because unfortunately the insurance companies don't cover it, is do food sensitivity testing, because when it comes down to it, everybody's different. And so there's not necessarily going to be a one diet fits all. There are general recommendations, but if you really want to know what's going on, you can actually be tested and figure out what foods you're sensitive to. Like, for example, I had a patient recently who had pelvic pain. She also had thyroid issues. And so we're like, okay, these are gut inflammatory things that can cause autoimmune issues. And so she was drinking a protein shake in the morning that had whey protein, which comes from milk. So we're like, oh, let's get you off of that. Let's put you on a pea protein shake, because most people tolerate pea protein very well. She was getting worse and worse and worse. And I finally was like, listen, we got to stop messing around with this. Let's get the food sensitivity testing. And lo and behold, she was sensitive to peas. So, and then once we, tweaked her diet, she started feeling so much better. So,
yeah. I tend to get the food sensitivity testing after I've kind of healed the gut, just because a lot of people who have increased gut permeability really light up like a Christmas tree. And it's kind of a waste of money unless after you've done, you really want to narrow it down if you're having trouble figuring out what's causing repeated sensitivities. If you're after the fact.
That's a good, I agree with you. That's a really good suggestion.
Yeah. So tell us more about that. You touched upon the microbiome in the vagina. What are some differences in that microbiome that is important for vaginal health as compared to gut health? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what happens is, we have microbiomes all over our body, and these are these little areas that the bacteria that tends to be the healthiest in that area. And so the vaginal microbiome of the vagina tends to be really, it makes the vagina very acidic, and it makes the vagina very acidic because of a bacteria in a class called lactobacillus. So most people have heard of lactobacillus acidophilus, which is in yogurt, but we're now finding that there's a whole bunch of other types of lactobacillus that like to live in the vagina. But they like to live there as long as there's their food source, and their food source is glycogen. Glycogen actually comes up from sloughed off vaginal tissue. So when we're young and we're menstruating, we have our estrogen and our hormones, our tissue's constantly growing and turning over, and old cells are sloughing off and feeding our lactobacillus. Unfortunately, lots of things can throw off that balance. Birth control can affect that and thin out the vagina. Pregnancy and breastfeeding can thin out the vagina. Menopause can thin out the vagina. Now the lactobacillus has lost its food source. It dies off. And now what ends up happening is then you get all these other bacteria that start coming in. A lot of these bacteria are coming from the gut, because as we're built as women, you have the urethra, the tube you pee through, you have the vagina, and you have the rectum or the anus very close together. And no matter how well you clean, there's going to be a passing back and forth of that bacteria naturally. It just happens.
Right.
So what ends up happening is that the microbiome can be thrown off because of lack of estrogen. That's one thing. It can be thrown off because of stress. It can be thrown off if you've gotten sick and been on antibiotics. And now which is so exciting and fascinating is now they're finding out that there's scientists doing a study that we've talked about the gut brain connection, but now they're talking about there's a brain-gut-vagina connection. And so when the microbiome of the vagina is off, they're testing now that there may be this feedback loop through the vagus nerve that tells the brain, like, oh, this is not an ideal time to be reproducing. And so what ends up happening is women of reproductive age may start having problems with their menses cycles being thrown off. They may have problems with infertility. But the biggest thing I find is fascinating that this may be a source of a decreased sex drive. Everybody blames hormones for sex drive, or stress, which those things do play a factor, but it could just be that the bacteria in the vagina is off and your body's like, oh, nope, not a time to reproduce. So let's shut down the sex drive. So that's really fascinating.
Really fascinating.
And the other thing is why the lactobacillus keeps the vagina healthy is lactobacillus produces hydrogen peroxide, and the hydrogen peroxide in turn kills off some of these bad bacteria that could then be causing recurrent vaginal infections, recurrent yeast infections, recurrent urinary tract infections, because it's also connected.
Yeah, bacterial vaginosis. Yeah. All of those things too. Yeah. So what advice do you have in terms of responding to that imbalance when that happens? Because obviously people do go through those phases in life. It's just part of normal life. What can people do to sort of get back that balance?
Part of it is, once again, feeding the gut and keeping the gut healthy, because if you have healthy bacteria in the gut, it's not going to get into the vagina and throw it off. The decreased hormones become a little bit more of a problem. If you're somebody that's using oral birth control or hormonal birth control and you're having recurrent issues, you may want to consider a different form of birth control. Like an IUD is probably a better option than the hormonal ones, which thin out the lining.
Right.
When we're pregnant or breastfeeding and postpartum, there's unfortunately not a lot you can do other than just eating healthy and trying to keep stress down. Postmenopausal, we have a lot more options. There's anything from topical estrogen to rebuild that tissue, all the way to laser therapy, which it fascinates me. The laser therapy is that we use light energy to stimulate the tissue to regrow. So there's a whole range of regenerative therapies that can be done for the vagina to return the tissue back to normal, and then can help with balancing out the microbiome.
And consequently improve sex drive?
Yes. Yeah, that's what they're looking at. That's what they're looking at right now.
That is great. That's great news. Really.
I mean, the other thing that goes along with that is when that tissue starts to thin out from lack of estrogen, it loses its elasticity. So women not only will have the microbiome thrown off, but sex can become very painful. So doing things to regenerate that tissue, whether it's using hormones or lasers, and you can actually, I mean, if you're on birth control and you want to stay on birth control, you can use lasers to regenerate that tissue. You can use, typically try to stay away from the topical hormones if you're on birth control, because you're already on hormones. But you can use those things. Laser can be used postpartum. I wouldn't use it during pregnancy, but it can be used postpartum and with breastfeeding, and won't affect the breastfeeding because it's non-hormonal. So those are all things that can be used to trigger the tissue to regrow and can help.
So for people to understand more, if they wanted to learn more about that, what should they look up? Is there a certain name of the type of laser therapy it is?
You know what? The original one that came out on the market in the United States in 2016 was the Mona Lisa Touch. Since that time, there's been a whole onslaught of companies realizing that this really is an area of concern. So there's so many different companies that make their own version of lasers. There's even some home devices, not laser, but using red light therapy, or using something called carboxy therapy, where it uses a gel version of carbon dioxide, when applied to the tissue, will suck oxygen in the tissue and will regenerate. So there are some home products that can do the same thing. They don't work as well as the laser, but they're home versions, and they're a little bit cheaper than a laser, because unfortunately that's something insurance doesn't cover. So something I try to talk about on my podcast, and even I have some social media posts out there on it. I always try to the laser. If you look up laser vaginal rejuvenation, usually you can find information about that. So
great. Yeah, I mean that's actually all very new to me. I don't know anything about it. So I'm sure a lot of other people don't either. So that's really good news, because some people can't tolerate hormones.
Or the concern is breast cancer patients. Even though some oncologists will allow them to use hormones topically, now we have options that are non-hormonal. So
no, that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. So, we have a few more minutes. What else have we not spoken about that I think is important for our this topic? Is there anything that we've missed? We've talked about a little bit about gut health and the gut microbiome. We did talk about how toxins can accumulate, especially those estrogen disruptor type toxins. But we didn't really mention how. I think it's important, but I have mentioned it in previous episodes with other people in similar health fields, is beta-glucuronidase. That beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that is made by the gut microbiome that can cleave off the OH bond and make the estrogen recirculate and not be dumped out of the body through the stool. And so that can cause what is a high level of estrogen-like toxins that act like estrogen and cause a lot of these symptoms, including pelvic pain, right? And depression, right?
It amazes me, because before I really learned about these like environmental estrogens and these endocrine disruptors, I had a patient that was a postmenopausal woman who had breast cancer and had pelvic pain. And we were working her up, and I got an estrogen level on her, and her estrogen level was through the roof. And we had no explanation for it in traditional medicine, because she was on tamoxifen, which is also a medicine that's supposed to like bring down your estrogen levels. She had breast cancer. So that's the other thing. She had breast cancer. And we were like, what are you doing? And it turned out she was the main person cleaning the house. And it was just all the different cleaners she was exposing herself to. And so I really, tell people, like, let's take a look at some of the things in your life, like don't drink out of plastic bottles if you can try to help it,
Right.
Try to get cleaning products, without all the toxins.
Right.
Try to eat organic if you can. I love Terry Walls has the best suggestion when it comes to eating organic.
Mm-hmm.
She said that if she can get people out in her rural area of the country that are on food stamps eating organic, that anybody can.
Right.
So I know it's expensive, but one of the things she says is, especially during the summer months, if you go to a farmer's market at the end of the day and the farmers don't want to truck those foods all the way back home. If you go up to them and be like, hey, how much for whatever you have left? Sometimes they'll give it to you. Sometimes you get it for cheaper.
Right.
So, or if you have to pick the foods to stay away from, go look up the Dirty Dozen, which is the list of foods that tend to be the most toxic if you're not getting it organically.
Right, right. And the other thing to look up that's also on the same website, the environmental working group website where that Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen are, is a link for Skin Deep, which is a great place to find out whether or not your makeup, all the cosmetics that you're putting on your skin and body have toxins in them as well. And you can find really healthy alternatives. And there's another thing called Think Dirty. It's an app.
I love that app.
Yeah, because you can actually use you can scan in and through a picture of whatever label that you're looking at. If you happen to be at the store, and right then and there, you can figure out whether or not it's something you should buy or put on you. Right.
I was surprised at things that I thought were healthy and that I was doing really well for my family when I found out about those two groups and that app. And I went around the whole house and scanned everything. And I realized, oh my God, even these things that like are marketed as potentially organic or healthy, they weren't necessarily rated well on those two places. So we chucked them all and got new products in the house.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could do that, check them all and get you stuff, or you can chuck one at a time, whatever fits, floats your boat. And as long as you're moving in that direction. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Greenleaf, for being here and talking about your area of expertise. I'm sure a lot of people are really going to appreciate the information that you provided, and connecting those dots, between the brain, the gut, and the pelvis, and everything else that's connected as well. It's not just limited to those three areas, but that's what we talked about today. I so appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being here. So thank you once again.